Have an action-packed day, so find a seat, and we're going to get started. My name is Eric John. I'm from MPA. It's a great pleasure to welcome you to our 2015 Research Symposium. Today, you'll hear select presentations from the Print and Digital Research Forum held in London back in October. But before we get started, I'd like to give a word of thanks to our sponsors, which include Experian Marketing Services, GFK MRI, and Nielsen Catalina Solutions. And now I'd like to welcome our Master of Ceremonies for today, Scott McDonald, President, Nomos Research.
Good morning, everyone. Let's see if I can get this to work. Okay, so I don't know how many people in the room have actually ever attended a print and digital research forum. It is a kind of a unique body. It has its roots in the Worldwide Readership Research Symposium, which met initially in 1981 in New Orleans. And among conferences, it has a reputation of being a little more academic, a little bit more the place where people come with the problems they're working on. So there's an emphasis on candor, on showing the warts and the problems as much as the solutions. And it's typically a place where there's an awful lot of learning that takes place. The PDRF meets in a symposium once every other year, usually in some interesting place. And this last time we met in London. Proposals for papers are submitted as prospectuses and reviewed by a peer group of practitioners in the field. There are very strict limits on how long each paper takes during the formal presentation, but there are no limits at all on the written version of the paper. So sometimes you'll see papers that are available in the archive that give all of the data, and they can be 50, 70 pages long, really detailed papers. They aren't all that long, of course, but the idea in part is to have a growing archive built initially around how you measure print media audiences, readership research, but as all media are digital, the conference over the years has become equally about the measurement of digital audiences or cross-platform audiences. So we met, I forgot to mention Sir Martin Sorrell. He was a highlight of this last year's session. He won't be appearing today, I'm afraid. But the proceeds of the conversation with him will be up on the PDRF website along with all of the papers. They're all being prepared right now. I'm working actually on a summary of the entire conference, which will be a part of that body of work that you can get at pdrf.net. So part of the idea today is to kind of give you a very compressed view of what we heard in London. We've invited most of the American papers. Not everybody could attend that contributed to the symposium from the US, but we have a pretty good sampling of them. Unfortunately, we have very little time to try and squeeze a 3-day conference into one half-day session here. So one of the biggest differences between the actual symposium and what you will experience today is that we elected not to ask everybody to compress their presentations radically to create enough time for Q&A. So we don't really have Q&A sessions scheduled here, and that's a central feature of the actual symposium. There's a half hour allotted to debate after each and every session, and it really is a lot of debate. People get up and ask for details and raise philosophical questions or raise technical questions, and it's quite illuminating. So all of that debate is transcribed. It's recorded live and transcribed and makes for very, very interesting reading if you want to dig into any of the subjects around any of these 8 themes that were explored in the sessions of the symposium. So the first one of these And on that subject of time, we're going to be keeping to very strict time schedules here. Usually at the symposium, because it's a very international audience, we're always begging everyone to speak slowly and enunciate clearly. Here it's just the opposite. Speak like a New Yorker and get off the stage a couple minutes early if you can. Be really fast. These, I think you can see, are the main topics that were covered. The overall theme of the conference, Media Invention, Reinvention, was really set by the first of the sessions, which recognizes the fact that the publishing industry is under financial pressure. There's been advertising spending flowing out of it to other sectors of the media. And the firms that are involved in the measurement of those audiences feel that pressure in the ecosystem because their core clients have less money to invest in measurement. So there are difficult trade-offs. Everybody wants a lot of quality, and they want it fast, and they want to measure cross-platform, and they want X, Y, and Z, and there isn't necessarily money for that. So how are different countries and different parts of the ecosystem managing that process of making those kinds of trade-offs? So that was the focus of the whole morning session. On the first day of the symposium, we had a panel discussion called Thinking the Unthinkable. Will future measurement bear any resemblance to what we do now? That was populated mostly by people from the agency side. Very animated discussion. And then moving through the rest of the symposium, going through these different topics, which will be replicated in miniature today. I wanted to call out just a couple of papers that may be worth your while to take a look at. One by Catherine Page. She has two papers that are both worth reviewing, one of which is just the regular overview of changes in readership measurement across the world. It involves a survey of about 60 countries, not all of which make it to the symposium, but the changes that they've been making to their own national readership surveys are discussed and analyzed in that paper. This paper that you're seeing the slide from here was Catherine's offering on the changes being made to the MRI of the UK, which is the National Readership Survey of Great Britain. And they had done something very similar to Magazine 360 a couple of years ago, where they took basically all the platforms and added them up together to try to demonstrate to the outside world that when you consider all of the platforms that magazines and newspapers are being published on, you get a much more robust view of audience engagement and demand for these media than if you just simply look at the print version of it. And that had the same effect there that we saw in the United States when that was introduced, when Magazine 360 was introduced, where the headlines improved a bit, and you went from the headlines about unrelieved decline to, oh wow, there's like, just had some growth of 1.4 million when, compared to the previous time period. That kind of change in the media narrative. But what they determined, and there was a lot of sort of political backstory, the newspapers kind of were wanting to go one direction, the magazines a different direction. They're measured in the same survey traditionally in the UK, led to a tender offer outside the United States. These are usually done through joint industry committees. And it led to basically a request for proposals from research companies to come up with meeting a whole new set of criteria for cross-platform measurement. Even though Ipsos had been the incumbent supplier, and it was thought that there may be an opportunity for other companies to take that away from them, and there was actually a fair amount of competition around that. Ipsos ended up winning the bid, and they did it through an alliance with ComScore that Catherine's paper described. Just real quickly, the new survey involves a similar level of it's, again, a random probability sample, in-home interviews being done on a tablet to collect the print readership data and information about other platform use. But out of that, they've recruited a digital panel that installs a tracking device on all digital devices. And then from that, they've created, sort of hooks to be able to do net audience estimations across platforms. So this is a a form of innovation. We see it in a few other countries. The UK is probably the biggest example of that we've seen thus far. And they made a very firm decision to kind of conserve the currency, if you will, and have basically the 5,000 panel was not going to be an independent estimate that was going to contradict the ComScore numbers that are already being used for web measurement in the UK. Rather, that ComScore and the readership numbers on both sides were going to be conserved, and the overlap would be used for calibration. That's kind of a graphic of how that's being done. So it's a fusion technique, but where you built the hooks for the fusion out of the original readership survey through this passive measurement of website visiting of that group. Benefits are, a thing that we don't quite have yet in the United States, sort of unduplicated reach and frequency across all platforms, but while you still have conservation of the currencies across the two. We heard a lot of reports from other countries about how they're managing these trade-offs. Just a few are highlighted here. Canada went through some organizational changes in the way that they approach their audience measurement for a magazine and newspaper media. They're sticking to a self-reported survey but boosting the sample size. A very interesting paper from France revisited the question of passive measurement and considered, for example, Google Glass and new technologies that have developed in the past few years as possible ways of doing passive measurement of print, but still discarded those as being not practical. A paper from Brazil attempted to measure attention moments across time. They've had a cross-platform survey in place in Sweden for a number of years now, the Orvesto survey. We heard a paper that took a look at longitudinal trends given that reality. We heard from both Netherlands and Norway of their efforts to do what I just showed you the UK is trying to do in developing a total brand footprint that gives you net reach and frequency and estimates of duplication across platform. We heard from Belgium where they have run a pilot now to have a panel of people download an app on their phones and record sort of day after exposures to newspapers, what they call daily-métrie. And a very interesting paper from the United Arab Emirates that wasn't actually attempting to measure the print medium at all, but was trying to get all screens through software installed at the router. So assuming that most homes have Wi-Fi, or if they don't, that they would install Wi-Fi being given to them by the research company, and from that way get a very unintrusive, low demand on the consumer indication of exactly which websites and which apps and which devices are being used, and through that which media are being exposed across a variety of screens within households. So a very interesting sampling of approaches, all coming back to the same basic question of how you do cross-platform measurement. One of the observations that I would make is that if you go back, 2 symposia ago, everybody was debating whether you could do cross-platform measurement and how you might do that, and by now it's just a given. Everyone is attempting to do this in varying levels, and it's I think sometimes interesting for those of us in the United States who kind of live within our own bubble. But when you go to a global conference like PDRF and you see the degree to which other countries are in some ways ahead of us in trying to solve for that. They have sometimes simpler situations and simpler economies, but it helps to kind of bring us out of our own methodological bubble. The panel, as I mentioned, went through a lengthy debate about the future of measurement, and I'm not going to belabor that, but part of what was one of the themes there was that people were interested less in platforms these days and more in just audiences across those platforms. But there was an awful lot of consensus as to what kinds of cross-platform data were needed. It's just everyone now is trying to build data management platforms, so they wanted those data to be consistent with that need. There was a set of sessions with technical papers, including some very good ones from MRI here in the United States, a pair of papers by Julian Boehm and Marty Frankel, neither of whom could attend today, unfortunately. But it gave an indication of what some of their thinking is, and in particular, Julian's paper on adjustments for non-response bias was showing kind of a methodology for for coping with the fact that you have weakening response rates across all survey technologies. And then Marty's paper, which is dealing with the issue of fluctuation that happens from wave to wave in the MRI survey, and saying, well, what are the smoothing techniques that are used in some other branches of statistics, and would that be useful here? There was an interesting paper by a fellow from News UK, Sean Adams, about neuroscience, and it was replicating some of the same results we've seen repeatedly in the US, where the behavior that people exhibit with tablets is very similar to the behavior that we see with paper, where they sort of flip through in the same way. And anyway, he was just using a lot of sort of neuroscience techniques. We'll hear a little bit more about that later on, to try and actually measure what's going on inside people's heads when they're reading on tablets versus reading on paper. His conclusions were that there's evidence of higher levels of encoding of memory from paper-based reading, and also of a more emotional response to paper-based reading, but that the recall measures are pretty even across the two. One of those situations in which stated versus observed results are a bit different. And I would commend, this was a prize-winning paper, so I'm calling it out here and kind of commending you to take a look at it. But in the interest of time, I'm not going to get into it. The prizes: Best Technical Innovation went to the MRI papers that I mentioned already. Best New Idea went to Lori Jacobs, here from Time Inc., and Mickey Galeen from MRI, on their paper on programmatic print buying, which you will hear of later today. Most useful was the pair of papers that I mentioned from Catherine Page. The best presentation, just for bells and whistles and fun to watch, was a paper, Will Print Drown or Surf in the Third Wave of Digital Advertising, by the Scandinavian pair that always do such a great job of making presentations at PDRF. Best newcomer was Maggie Zach, also from Time Inc. here, and a paper you will see later today. And then you will see both of these papers today. I'm given, as the chairman of PDRF, the discretion to give a paper that I think deserves special commendation, and I gave it actually to both of the papers from ComScore, from Steve Millman. So, and then as I mentioned, that Tablets on the Brain paper was voted the best paper overall. So if you're at all interested in the neuroscience angle of things, or on the question of tablet versus paper-based reading, pull that off the website and take a good look at it. Okay, and with